I'm Ainsley Earhart.
I'm Brett Baer.
I'm Katie Pavlich, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, May 5th, 2021. I'm Jessica Rosenthal. We've heard the complaints about big tech, but now some lawmakers say they're ready to act, introducing legislation that could alter how social media companies operate if such laws were to pass Congress.
This is not trying to protect or dilute the economic investment these companies have made, but this is about preventing them from denying the right of free speech.
I'm Chris Foster. Republicans are counting on a big red wave to take back the House next year.
Earlier this year, they targeted 47 House Democrats that they said were vulnerable coming up in the 22 midterms. Now they're upping that by 10, up to 57 House Democrats they're going to try to target. They think that they can flip some of these seats from blue to red.
We speak with Fox News national politics reporter Paul Steinhauser.
I'm Liz Peek. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
We've been hearing lawmakers talk and really complain about big tech for a while now. Democrats like Senator Elizabeth Warren were on the campaign trail in 2019 talking about the need to break up large social media and tech companies. Republicans, including at the time President Trump, blasted companies like Twitter and Facebook, accusing them of censoring conservatives. They talked about repealing their liability protections in Section 230.
The censorship and bias is a threat to freedom itself. Imagine if your phone company silenced or edited your conversation. Social media companies have vastly more power and more reach than any phone company in the United States, more reach actually than your newspapers by far.
President Trump signed an executive order last spring that called for a review of Section 230 after Twitter flagged some of his posts. Earlier this year, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey testified before a House committee, along with the CEOs of Facebook and Google, about disinformation and how they combat it, revealing that he feels caught between a rock and a hard place.
Many of you will have strong opinions on how effective we are in this work. Some of you will say we're doing too much in removing free speech rights. Some of you will say we're not doing enough and end up causing more harm. Both points of view are reasonable and worth exploring.
President Trump was banned from Twitter and suspended from Facebook after the January 6th Capitol riots. And today, Facebook will announce if the former president's account will be reinstated. It may not matter. Tuesday, Trump's team announced a new platform. It is called From the Desk of Donald J. Trump. It reads sort of like a series of tweets without any user comment or engagement. Now, one solution may be coming up with your own platform, but some lawmakers are now starting to introduce legislation. Missouri Republican Senator Josh Hawley told Fox and Friends this week his legislation would break up the tech and social media companies.
We ought to be able to say what we want to say within the bounds of the law, of course, in this country. And the idea that these corporations would decide what we can say and can't say and who can speak and can't speak, it's crazy.
Another piece of legislation would try to make social media companies common carriers.
Well, common carriers like a telephone company, what telegraphs used to be, rail.
Tennessee Republican Senator Bill Hagerty.
It's basically a common sort of platform that the public should have non-discriminatory access to. And that's what big tech has become. They really have become sort of our modern-day town square where people go to get information, to share information. They perform a role in a very similar way, except the phone company doesn't like what you have to say or doesn't like whom you may be or what political party you're from. They can't just cancel your phone line.
Right.
That's not the case with big tech these days.
The Obama administration's FCC classified broadband as a common carrier. That was impacting internet service providers. Apparently, they didn't really enforce strict rules there, but they did that classification as a way to enforce net neutrality at the time. So an internet service provider couldn't, slow down traffic to one site that maybe, say, doesn't pay a fee. But under President Trump, the FCC repealed that common carrier status when it applied to net neutrality. Why are you okay with this particular designation now for this case?
Well, it's because free speech is what I'm trying to protect. This is not trying to protect or dilute the economic investment these companies have made, but this is about preventing them from denying the right of free speech. So it's a different concern, and that's what this censorship does when they can come in and fact check and apply whatever lens they use. Again, it's opaque. It's not shared with people with whom they've applied it. I was just talking with somebody earlier today who had been canceled. He'd written once, twice, three times, asking what were the grounds no answer, no reply. This structure that's in place right now, using Section 230 immunity as a way to hide behind it, this is just allowing censorship of voices that folks at these big tech platforms disagree with.
I want to get to Section 230 in a second, but I want to elaborate more on this idea of censorship and free speech because, you talk about free speech, and we know that the government can infringe on your right of free speech, right? That's what, obviously, the First Amendment's all about. But when you start applying it to a private company's ability to moderate its content or restrict speech, where's that line legally? Because I imagine these companies will fight back and say, listen, we don't have to allow certain speech.
Well, if they're going to disallow certain speech, and this was actually contemplated in the, again, we're getting towards Section 230 now, but this was contemplated in that act 25 years ago, that these platforms will be able to take off, to address obscene and lewd sort of, commentary or content. But there is sort of an extra, an extra opening there, or otherwise disagreeable, I believe is the word, content, which is something that these large tech companies have driven a truck through. That opening is far too vague. So we need to have criteria that are much tighter and, really address the type of behavior I think that was intended in the original 230, rather than having this open-ended, easy to interpret as you want type of structure, which has been put in place now to allow, frankly, just outright censorship.
And your legislation would repeal 230, right? And we should inform everybody Section 230 is what limits the liability against these companies if a third party writes or says something that, somebody objects to. That these companies, Facebook and Google, are protected legally. Your legislation would repeal that 230?
Yes, it would repeal 230, and it would replace it with something much tighter, much less easy to game, and something that would prevent the type of censorship that we've seen today.
I've been reading
them from keeping a family-friendly type of environment that I think was intended, in terms of obscene, lewd type of content.
Right.
But the criteria that they would use would have to be made public. That way, people can know how the content that they're receiving is being modulated, and how it's being screened.
I've been reading about some of the fears that repealing 230 sort of invokes in some folks, in the tech world. And my understanding is that there's this fear that things could then be left up to the courts if they didn't have this particular protection. And a ruling there could result in even more censorship depending on the lawsuit. And, places as big as like Google and Facebook could weather those consequences. They've got the cash, but maybe a smaller upstart would not be able to, if they got sued without the protections of 230. So this might end up backfiring, they say, and make these tech companies even more powerful because they could handle a lawsuit or two. What do you think of those concerns?
Yeah. I'm sensitive to that argument, Jessica. That's why we've made the cutoff of this, those platforms that have more than 100 million active monthly users worldwide.
Got it.
So again, this is focused on the large platforms that really have become the public square, not on the nichier platforms or the upstarts, but that as you rightly underscore, may have difficulty dealing with this, but this would focus on the really large ones. Again, in my mind, that focus much more like a common public platform.
Right. You, as I noted, are just among a few people in Congress putting forth legislation, but we know Senator Hawley has done so as well. His legislation is, I think it's called the Bust Up Big Tech Act, and it would ban mergers of companies worth a certain amount of money and do things like keep Amazon from selling, an Amazon-backed product alongside a competitor product. Is this kind of legislation something you back, or could it function alongside legislation like yours, or do we have to kind of pick?
I spoke with Senator Hawley very briefly last week. We just put our legislation out last week as we're leaving for recess, and when I get back this coming week, I'm looking forward to engaging with my colleagues in the Senate to find ways that we can work together. Again, this is my legislation, but I'd like to see this passed. And working with other senators to get that done is something I'm looking forward to do, and modifying it, incorporating components of other pieces of legislation is something I'm very receptive to. Again, I have not studied Senator Hawley's bill, But we've talked about it at a very high level. So I look forward to engaging with him and others when I get back to Washington next week.
Tell me a little bit about what you say to people who say, look, you're talking about regulation. Regulation is something we thought Republicans, wanted to stay away from, get government out of things. You're talking about getting government more involved in something. And this would obviously not be a free market solution, right? Why is this the right approach?
Jessica, I'm sensitive to what you're saying as well. I'm the last person that looks to government as the answer and more regulations when you're looking at a problem. But this is a problem that has become so large, as these companies have become so large. And it really has impacted people in a way that I think is quite unfortunate. And when I saw what was happening, over the past year and a half, where you have these platforms coming in and fact-checking and canceling, people that tend to be conservative, by the way, but fact-checking American leaders, yet allowing Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran to talk about death to Israel and talk about how to do it, and that doesn't get checked or censored. There really is a problem there, and it looks like a double standard, and we need to make this a non-discriminatory access point, and one where the criteria are equally applied to all. That is impinging on free speech, in my view, and that's why it's worthy of, again, I guess I'm the last person that looks to a regulatory or a government answer to things, but this is an area where I think it's appropriate.
And finally, today, Facebook's oversight board is going to announce whether or not former President Trump should have his account reinstated or if he should be banned permanently. If he is permanently banned, what will that mean, if anything, for this debate? Or is it just a continuation of this debate because Twitter and Facebook, were all over President Trump while he was president? Well,
in terms of what it means for this debate right now, I think it's a continuation, as you indicated, of a problem that's been mounting. But it didn't just start yesterday. This is a problem that's been growing, but it's becoming, more and more obvious to the American public. And again, whatever decision Facebook makes regarding President Trump, it's putting this whole concern into the limelight and reminding Americans that this is a real issue. And the fact that you've got a panel that resides at one of these big tech platforms that is going to make this sort of decision. How arbitrary is the decision? What criteria are they applying? Is it the same criteria for President Trump that it would be for someone else? These are all questions that are in people's minds today because of the opaqueness of it, because of the unfairness of it, and the fact that they don't. These platforms don't have to abide by the types of rule set that a common carrier would.
Well, Senator Hagerty, thank you so much for your time.
Jessica, thank you. Great to be with you.
This is Liz Peek with your Fox News commentary coming up.
Presidents sometimes have a short window to work with getting big things done. President Obama, for example, was able to get the Affordable Care Act passed with Democrats controlling the House and Senate. They lost the House in 2010, and the Obama agenda was largely stymied, even more so when Republicans also took the Senate in 2014. President Trump still had a Republican House and Senate to work with when he was elected and was able to get a huge tax cut passed during his first year in office. Alas, in 2018, Democrats took back the House with Nancy Pelosi becoming Speaker.
To the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, I extend to you this gavel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader McCarthy. I look forward to working with you in a bipartisan way for the good of our country.
With Democrats also winning the White House and the Senate in last year's elections by slim margins, President Biden has a window of opportunity now, but it's not very big and it may not last long. Top House Republican Kevin McCarthy predicts he'll be Speaker next year, telling the Political Conservative Action Conference in February,
I would bet my house this is the smallest majority the Democrats have had in 100 years. We could do it.
And history's on his side.
Traditionally in the midterm elections, the party that controls the White House loses anywhere from about 25 to 30 seats in the House. That's a problem for the Democrats because Joe Biden is in the White House right now. So history is not working on the Democrats' side right now.
Fox News national politics reporter Paul Steinhauser.
Redistricting alone may be the ticket for the Republicans winning back the majority. And if you look at the early numbers that came out of the census just last week, you see that some big Republican states where the Republicans control all the levers of government, think Texas, think Florida, they're gaining seats. States where the Democrats can rule the roost, think New York, Illinois, California, they're going to be losing seats. thanks to the 2020 census. And because of that, the National Republican Congressional Committee, known by its acronym, the NRCC, that's the re-election arm of House Republicans, they're upping their targets now. Earlier this year, they targeted 47 House Democrats that they said were vulnerable coming up in the 22 midterms. Now they're upping that by 10, up to 57 House Democrats they're going to try to target. They think that they can flip some of these seats from blue to red. And a lot of these 10 that were just added were added because of the census report, and they're from those states that we just talked about, New York, Illinois, and California.
Targeting meaning more money, more attention in those races.
Exactly. These are the seats they're going to concentrate on. The Republicans are going to concentrate on, these Democrats, where they think they can flip these seats from blue to red. You'll see digital ads, TV ads, radio by the NRCC, and also by outside groups that back Republicans.
Look at the Senate for a minute, too. Over the last 80 years or whatever, the president's party has lost Senate seats in most of the midterm elections. Not all. It didn't happen in 2018. The Republicans actually picked up some. Part of that was just a function of the map that year. It just was a better Republican year. Which states can we see to be really contested that we might not think would have been contested next year?
Yeah, and here's the beauty of it. You think the margins are narrow in the House, and they are. Even more narrow in the Senate, right? It's a 50-50 Senate right now, but the Republicans are in the minority. The Democrats are in the majority because Kamala Harris, the vice president, is a Democrat, so they get that extra tie-breaking vote. Republicans, though, when you look at the map, they only need a net gain of 1 to regain the majority, but they are defending 20 of the 34 seats up for grabs in 2022. So they're playing a lot of defense, and in some states, they're going to be defending an open seat. Think Pennsylvania and North Carolina, two crucial battleground states. Republican senators there are retiring. Republicans definitely got their work cut out for them. But here's the flip side, and it's a big but. There are 4 states where the Republicans think they have a very good shot of flipping a blue seat red. And those 4 senators are Raphael Warnock in Georgia. He was just elected, remember, back in January in the runoff election down there. Mark Kelly in Arizona, also just elected in November to just a 2-year term, a special election. And then 2 other Democrats who they think are very vulnerable. We're talking about Maggie Hassan, first-term senator from New Hampshire, and Cortez Masto in Nevada. So the Republicans think they have a clear shot here. They're looking at those 4 states. That's where they're going to be targeting.
Looking at the Republicans right now, we could see a shakeup in leadership. The ghost of President Trump is still affecting things. Representative Liz Cheney from Wyoming has said, look, President Trump lied about the election being stolen. She's been attacking him in person in speeches on social media. President Trump is attacking her back as he can through memos now that he's off social media. And there are people in the Republican Party in the House who want her to be removed from her leadership. Our House Minority Leader McCarthy is saying that she can't carry out the party's message anymore. So what happens? Is her successor necessarily going to be somebody who is more, aligned with President Trump?
This is a huge intra-party battle on the Republican side right here, and it's grabbing a ton of attention, both in the media and on social media, you name it. This is a huge story right now, and it also shows just how popular Donald Trump remains with Republican base voters and how influential and how much clout he still has over GOP politicians that were in this place right now. Earlier this year, Trump loyalists in the House tried to boot Cheney from her number 3 position in the House conference, but they were unsuccessful. She easily crushed it. But times have changed. That was like 2 or 3 months ago, and I think the former president's clout is even more stronger now than it was then. And McCarthy, who defended Cheney back in January and February during that first push to oust her from her leadership position, is not doing that anymore, and is questioning whether she can effectively be a good messenger for the Republican House conference anymore, because when it comes to Donald Trump, she doesn't see eye to eye with the vast majority of House Republicans. So the votes weren't with the Trump loyalists last time. They may be this time. Plus, Cheney's up for re-election just like everybody else in the House. They're up every 2 years. So she faces re-election next year, and there is a concerted effort by Donald Trump and his political team to find a single challenger to get behind to try and oust her next year. And Wyoming is a state that Donald Trump did extremely well in. So Cheney's facing a number of problems on a number of fronts.
Yeah, the president said on his way out the door, look, if you weren't with me, you were against me, and I'm going to use my money and my megaphone to go after your seat next time.
Yep, and it's not just Cheney. Also think about Lisa Murkowski. There were 7 Senate Republicans who voted to convict Donald Trump in that impeachment trial back in February. She's the only one of those 7 Republicans who's up for re-election next year. Trump has vowed to go after her, and he's also vowing to come back to Georgia and campaign against the Republican governor there, Brian Kemp, who used to be a huge Trump loyalist, but Trump blames Kemp for not helping him as he tried to upend and overturn the election results in Georgia, where Joe Biden had a narrow victory over Donald Trump back in November.
I mean, as usual, this time of a presidential cycle, there are umpteen Republicans that are interested in throwing their hat in the ring, but they can't because President Trump is still out there saying, I'm thinking about running again. Is that going to hurt them in terms of getting their operations up and running and in terms of fundraising if big donors say, look, I'm not committing to anybody until we know what Trump's doing?
Won't know on the fundraising for a little bit, but it seems to a degree, yes. I mean, as the former president repeatedly teases and flirts with another run in 2024 to try to regain the White House, that is slowing down the field a bit, but it's not stopping it altogether. Former Vice President Mike Pence making some news this week. Fox News first to report that Pence will be heading in early June to headline a major fundraising dinner for the New Hampshire Republicans. And, of course, New Hampshire, the first in the nation presidential primary state. And just last week, he gave his first speech since leaving the administration, since the end of the Trump administration. And where did he give that speech? In South Carolina. That's one of the other early voting states. They go third in the Republican calendar, and it's the first Southern primary. So Pence definitely starting to, spark speculation about 2024 with these visits. And he's not the only one. Mike Pompeo, Trump's Secretary of State during the Trump administration, has already been to Iowa. So has 2 senators named Scott, Tim Scott of South Carolina, Rick Scott of Florida, 2 others we think of as potential contenders. Iowa, of course, is the state that kicks off the primary process with its caucuses. And Nikki Haley, the former South Carolina governor, she's heading to Iowa coming up soon. Tom Cotton has also been very visible as well, and some others. So, yeah, Trump has slowed the field down, but he's not stopping these other potential contenders for the White House from starting to make those early moves.
And apologies to listeners who are irritated that we're talking about a presidential election that's 3.5 years away. That's just sometimes how it works when we do this. Paul, there was a special election in Texas for a House seat. It's called the jungle election, that is, where Republicans and Democrats were all in the same field. 2 Republicans made it to the runoff. A Democrat barely finished third. But Republicans really outpaced Democrats in total of all the candidates, 62% of the vote to 37%. I know special elections are weird, and it's just one state, but does that special election say anything about what could happen in 2022?
It might. Sometimes special elections are a good barometer of things to come. Sometimes they're a terrible barometer, so we won't know until November of 2022. But here's why Republicans are crowing right now over this past weekend's results down there in that 6th congressional district of Texas. Don Wright was the Republican congressman in the district, won re-election last year by single digits, and Donald Trump only carried the district, which starts in the suburbs and parts of the southern part of Fort Worth, and then goes further south into the exurbs and the rural areas south of Fort Worth and Dallas. Trump only won it by 2 or 3 points. So Democrats looked at this district and said, this is a competitive district. This is maybe we have a chance of flipping a red seat blue here. Didn't happen, obviously, as you mentioned, with those results. And that's why Republicans are saying this is a sign, folks, that A, Texas isn't turning blue anytime soon, and B, Joe Biden is unpopular and the Democrats are going to lose the House in 2022. Do they have a case to make there? Yeah, of course they do. But again, we won't know. It's only one special election. Sometimes they get it right. Sometimes they get it wrong.
Very early reasons for Republican optimism looking at next year's midterms with Fox News national politics reporter Paul Steinhauser. Paul, thanks for coming back on The Rundown. Good to talk to you.
Great to join you guys. Thank you.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
I'm Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist, and I'm inviting you to join a new conversation with the smartest thinkers out there about the country and where we're going. Subscribe to the Ben Domenech Podcast.
Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Liz Peek, what's on your mind?
Well, this is confusing. After a year of slamming the United States as systemically racist, President Biden now says, I don't think the American people are racist. Come again? How can a country be racist if its people are not? Surely a country cannot be racist if its people twice elected a Black president, or if they back policies demanding equality. We have laws banning discrimination. We have jury trials that convict white cops who kill Black men. And we have schools, religious organizations, neighborhoods, and political parties that are open to all. Biden made his head-spinning comment in an interview with NBC when asked to respond to Tim Scott's declaration that America is not a racist country. Twice the president agreed with a Republican senator from South Carolina. Maybe Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who has recently also said America is not a racist country, are backpedaling because they realize they've overplayed the race card. Polling shows Americans' concern about racism has dropped sharply in recent months, even as worries about immigration, unemployment, and budget deficits have soared. Race is important to Democrats who count on receiving roughly 90% of the Black vote. It is especially important to Joe Biden. If not for African Americans handing him the Democratic primary in South Carolina, he would not be president. A recent poll from Harvard's Kennedy School Institute of Politics may shed some light on Biden and Harris's surprising about face. It shows 46% of young Americans feel, quote, included in Biden's America, unquote, including 61% of Blacks and 51% of Hispanics. However, only 39% of whites felt that Biden's America was hospitable to them. Surely disenfranchising young white voters cannot work well for Democrats. A bigger problem for Democrats, though, is the success and popularity of a Black conservative like Tim Scott. Scott can speak to racism, which does exist in America, as it does in every country of the world. But Scott can also attribute his success to, quote, a string of opportunities that are possible only here in America, unquote. Democrats do not want young Black kids to know that if they work hard and get a good education, the sky is the limit. First, that would crimp their ambition to vastly grow the welfare state. Second, it turns the spotlight on the teachers' unions and on the failures of our inner city public schools. Scott said, education is the closest thing to magic in America. Tragically, not all minority kids can access that magic. Americans are proud of our country, including its remarkable history of lifting up all kinds of people. Joe Biden has it right. We are not a racist people. This is Liz Peek, Fox News contributor.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. Fox Nation presents podcasts Women of the Bible Speak.
I'm Shannon Bream, host of Fox News at Night and author of the new book, Women of the Bible Speak, the wisdom of 16 women and their lessons for today. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, foxnewspodcast.com, or wherever you download your podcasts.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.